fermentable sugars from malted barley. This malt extract is quite concentrated and very thick and syrupy. So you'll want to stir the pot very thoroughly and make sure that you mix everything in very thoroughly. Once we add our malt extract to the water, it's commonly referred to as wort, which is a brewer's word for unfermented beer. It's important to get all the malt extract out of the jar and into your wort. So I usually rinse the jar out with hot water and scrape the insides of the jar to get the rest into your pot. Once you've mixed your malt extract thoroughly into your wort, the next step is to bring everything to a boil. This can be done on your kitchen stove at home, but for demonstration purposes today, I'm using a propane burner. When your wort is approaching a boil, it's important to watch the pot and nurse the boil to a calm, comfortable rolling boil carefully without allowing it to surge up and boil over, just like a pot of spaghetti. You might want to control the heat or your flame just to make sure that we don't boil over and make a big sticky mess all over your stove or burner. Once you've reached a calm, comfortable boil, it's time to start your bittering addition. You'll want to take your hops out of their bag and place them into your muslin bag. Tie the hops off in your muslin bag so that none of them can escape in your boil. Add them to your boiling wort and begin your 60-minute timer to start a 60-minute boil. As you're boiling your bittering addition, you'll be extracting the bitterness from those hops to counter the sweetness of the malt in your wort. Your recipe may call for a flavoring or an aroma addition of hops in the last 15 minutes of your boil. So you'll want to add those hops as per the recipe. And we have a 15-minute addition to the pot here. The 15-minute mark of your 60-minute boil is also the time to add your Werflock tablet, which will coagulate the proteins that would cause a hazy beer and cause them to fall out after fermentation, leading to a beer with better clarity and presentation. So I'm adding my hops to the muslin bag and tying it off. And steeping them in the pot, and I also make my Werflock addition at this moment. At the end of your 60-minute boil, you'll want to chill the wort down to a temperature that won't harm your yeast as quickly as possible. At home, you could submerge your pot in an ice bath in your sink to help cool it down. Today, I'll be using this wort chiller as a heat exchanger to course cold water through the coil and remove the heat through the water that's leaving it. I'm going to place the wort chiller into the wort for the last 10 minutes of the boil in order to allow the boil to sanitize this wort chiller, because it's important that there's no bacteria left in the wort that could cause off flavors in our beer. Once your boil is finished, it's important to properly sanitize any equipment that might come in contact with your beer or wort. These sanitizers are readily available at any local homebrew supply store, and most of them are no-rinse sanitizers, which means you can merely soak or wash any of your equipment for a few moments in the sanitizer, allow it to drip dry, and you can put it into your wort or beer with no risk of contamination. So I'm going to sanitize my carboy by splashing my sanitizer around and pour it back out. A lot of these sanitizers create foam, which is perfectly food grade and safe, and you don't need to concern yourself with getting all of the foam out of your equipment, but you merely need to make sure that everything that'll come in contact with your beer has been rinsed appropriately with the sanitizer. Remove your hop bags from the wort and add your wort to the fermenter. Top the wort up to 5 gallons with cold water. It's important to use a larger fermenter than the batch size that you're fermenting, because as the wort ferments, it foams up a lot like what you can see here. I have a 6-gallon fermenter here with 5 gallons of wort in it and lots of room for foam during the fermentation. Once your wort is topped up to 5 gallons and about room temperature, it's time to add the yeast. The simplest yeast to use is a packet of freeze-dried ale yeast because it can be torn open and poured directly into the wort to begin fermentation. So you'll want to sprinkle all of the yeast into your wort, and there's no stirring necessary. The yeast rehydrate themselves and begin to ferment your wort on their own. After you've added the yeast, attach the airlock with a rubber stopper to your carboy, which will allow the gas from fermentation out of the fermenter but stop airborne bacteria from getting in. Here we have our fermenting beer, and you can see there's a lot of foam coming up from the CO2 being produced, and that CO2 is escaping through the airlock. And this process will take a bare minimum of 2 weeks before you move on to bottling your beer. Here we have a fermented batch of beer that's ready for bottling. In order to siphon this beer into my bottling bucket, I need to raise it up to a level higher than the level that I'm going to be working from. Prepare a corn sugar solution by mixing 3 or 4 ounces of corn sugar with 1 or 2 cups of water and boil it until the solution is clear again. Add that solution to the bottom of your bottling bucket and siphon your beer into the bottling bucket on top of the sugar solution to mix it thoroughly. In order to siphon this batch of beer, I'm going to use my auto siphon here, which is readily available at any homebrew store. And after sanitizing the auto siphon, place the end of the tube in your bottling bucket, place the siphon into the batch of beer, and simply pump the auto siphon to prime the line and get your siphon started. So now that we have our batch of beer mixed with a small amount of fermentable sugar in our bottling bucket, we're going to attach our bottle filler to the end of our auto siphon. Place the auto siphon into your batch of beer. Place one end of the bottle filler into the bottles and start your siphon. When you press the bottle filler down into the bottom of the bottle, it'll fill from the bottom without splashing, because at this point, once you have fermented beer, introducing oxygen and splashing it into your beer will stale the beer and decrease the shelf life. So we want to siphon it carefully into our bottles without splashing. When your bottle is full, right to the brim, we're almost there. Pull the bottle filler out of the bottle, and that'll stop the flow. You can place that in your sanitizer if you'd like. Take a sanitized cap, an uncrimped sanitized cap from your homebrew supply store, place it on top of your bottle, and use your capper to crimp the cap down onto the bottle. And you have a bottled beer. Once you've filled and capped all your bottles, you'll need to allow a week or 2 for the small amount of sugar that we added back to the batch of beer to ferment inside the bottles and create carbonation. None of these processes are entirely hard. I find the process to be fun and simple. And the most important part is after time you can be creative with your recipes and you'll absolutely love the beer that you're making. Eventually you'll find that you can make beer exactly like you'd like it to taste. Beer that fits your own personal tastes, beer that impresses your friends, and beer like nothing you've ever tasted before.
I wanted to have a place that was like the traditional public house. It is like your living room. What I learned over there in my apprenticeship in England was that the public house is a people-centric business. you guys get a chance to go upstairs?
No, we haven't yet.
Look at the damage.